Before we begin this conversation, I want to show you something. This is a section of our adoption paperwork, the moment it became all official. It states that the state would subsidize our adoption. It also tells us our adopted mother had recently graduated from cosmetology school and was working part time, just 25 hours a week. My adopted father had recently resigned as a pastor and was working a temporary job that would soon come to an end. They had time, they had help, they had full authority over our lives. So the question is, why didn't they show up for us? Why didn't they use that time to build a safe home, to clean, to nurture, to repair the brokenness they brought us into? Instead, this is the house we were raised in. And instead of being protected, we were blamed, told we were dirty, that we were the ones who messed up the home, that we created the chaos. But let me ask you this. What kind of adult blames a child for the condition of the home that they had full control over? What does it say about a person when they'd rather label a child as the problem than to acknowledge their own neglect? And how many of us were forced to believe that love was supposed to feel like shame, that caretaking meant survival and not safety? This isn't about blame. It's about breaking silence. It's about asking the question we were never allowed to ask out loud. It's about holding up the mirror, not to cause harm, but to name harm. The interview you are about to hear isn't from me. It's from someone 10 years older, someone who stayed in our home briefly, but saw enough to remember, enough to confirm things we were always told weren't real, enough to say, no, you didn't imagine that. This is the one of those moments where truth becomes louder than denial. So now I ask you, what do we do with the truth once we finally speak it out loud? And what kind of healing becomes possible when we stop protecting the people who didn't protect us? Let's begin.
Well, let me ask you this. What is your end game goal? Like, are you just trying to reconcile what you've always thought and just need some backup validation? Or what do you want to come out of this?
That's a really good question, and I'm happy you asked me because at first I didn't know. Okay. Mm-hmm. But going to therapy and digging deep, I have always had family dangled over my head. Like when my family, that family, and we don't say names, okay? So we'll just say caregivers. When caregivers were getting something out of me, so I didn't know what family was, you know. I tried so hard to belong. And then for years, they've had me since I was 2. So for 40 years, I have been trying to fit and mold into a sadistic person's love that dangled that would give me a little bit just to turn around and shut me down. So
which sadistic person are we referring to here?
The woman caregiver.
Okay.
And what happened is I wanted to address my childhood with her, and they said, you know, the adopted brother said, we've hashed this out. My caregiver father said, oh, we've hashed this out. But back then when we talked about it, I was not emotionally intelligent to receive exactly what was going on. It was an email. I'm sorry, but no one was ever willing to sit and talk about the abuse that was going on in that home. And so, as I have been really working on me and going to therapy and just really been on this healing journey and just developing emotional intelligence, I started thinking that, hold on a second, these people are therapists. These people are, you know, of God. Why would they
Mm-hmm.
shut me down when all I want is some answers, like what was going on? And I'm not looking for an apology. I'm just looking for acknowledgement of the abuse, of the sadistic abuse that was going on. And my adopted caregiver said to me, "You're making that up. Nothing ever happened to you. You were never abused. I never treated you any kind of way. I am doing this because I'm no longer going to have a gag order on the horrible and heinous acts that were done against me. But also, I'd like to expose what healing really looks like. I'm not looking for an apology. I don't even want anyone to go to jail because I have respect, a little bit of respect. So that's why I'm not naming names. I'm not going to talk about names. But I'd like to expose the unhealthy concepts of what healing really looks like, because healing's not that skinny girl at the end of the beach saying, "Oh, I made it." Healing is a very dark place that gives you anxiety. You got to go reach down there and you got to be like, "Hey, little Chantel, like I have to constantly give her hugs." And so I'd like to help other people through my story. I want to show them that you can ask questions. You can be angry, you can be upset, and you can still reserve a little tiny little dignity when you want to talk about your story.
Yeah, I mean, I think all that is going to be good for you. Are you going to be okay if you never get acknowledgement? I mean, this is the hard thing about truth and facing it, and pasts and memories, because people are real good at convincing themselves that a thing didn't happen, or that's not the way it was, or but your experience is your experience. You've spent the better portion of your life questioning, and you are owed answers. I don't know if anybody who delivers abuse, I mean, I think it takes a real, I wouldn't say that I think it's uncommon for people who are the abusers to cop to what they've done, because even when you were talking to like your birth mom, and I realized she's probably not in a great headspace, but there's always going to be an excuse for why it was that way. You guys have had to claw, your way out of stuff, and I want you to stay on that trajectory and not get drugged down into the muck of it all, of this is what it was, and it was so horrifically unfair to all of you. And each one of you in that house had a story that was awful. I know that we spent the most time together, and I felt bad.
Can you take me back to the condition of the home that I was living in? Tell me, how much do you think that we contributed to the condition of the home?
The conditions were that you lived in a historical neighborhood, and everybody's house around you was historically preserved and well maintained. And then there was the house you lived in. The porch, I believe, was falling in. There, I don't even know if you had floors. I feel like they were like particle board in places. Holes in walls. I don't remember things like how dirty it was, other than the basement. But it, you guys were in charge of doing all that stuff, and there was a lot of people in and out. There was traffic constantly, and so there was just stuff everywhere. It wasn't maintained. The upkeep of the house was not maintained. It was falling apart.
Okay.
Places weren't safe. You know, like you could go through a step probably at some point. Yeah, I think somebody maybe did.
My mom used to say that we were the ones who were dirty. She would say, "You're the dirty ones. You guys always are messing up things. You guys are always..." It was always us. It was never the company she kept or the company she allowed to be at the home. It was always the little kids that were that dirty.
Well, little kids are dirty.
Exactly.
I mean, how often do you leave your kids at home all day and come back to find it in one piece? You know, the home was already its own issue.
Oh,
then you had all these extra people living there. So there's stuff everywhere. I don't know if there was a way to keep it clean. I mean, there were no adults scrubbing things or like dusting things or vacuuming things, or it was all you guys. So it was the best that kids can do, the best that kids do at cleaning, which is, you know, whatever right in front of them, right? Even now, I mean, I tell my kid all the time, use your mom eyes, right? How did you clean that room the way I would clean that room? If you're vacuuming, are you vacuuming the way I would vacuum? Don't vacuum the way you would vacuum. Vacuum the way I would vacuum, right? Which is to do more than one swipe in a room. But that's just kids. And so if you don't show them, how do they know? And no, there were no adults showing you. There was no adult modeling that. There were adults yelling at you to do it and, you know, blaming you guys for the mess. But I don't know. There wasn't enough space for everybody. Kids not every kid had a bedroom. So there was just, you know, there was stuff.
Right. Let's talk about the basement where you lived.
Where I lived was an unfinished basement.
Mm-hmm.
I had a mattress on the floor. I don't remember the condition of that mattress, and I'm glad that I don't, because that would be gross, I'm sure. And it was fine down there. That's where like the older of us were. That I was 19, so us 19, 20-year-olds that were staying there where we were. And then the Huskies came, and I don't remember how many, but I feel like we had a male and a female, and then we had puppies.
Yep.
And the Huskies were kept. I don't know if they were tied up, but they were for sure barricaded in to an area, and they were never let out. They never left that area. Nobody took them out, not to go to the bathroom, not to go for a walk, not to play. That's just where they lived. And it was awful, and it was covered in shit, and puppies died, and it was really awful. And like I told you, I think that was the time that I for sure was like, I can't.
Yep. And that had been the trajectory of the entire time in that house was our caregivers getting animals, letting them shit and piss everywhere, and we had to clean it up.
Yeah, like I said, there were no adults modeling what should happen. It was just your responsibility, and if you didn't know how to do it, or if you didn't do it, it didn't get done. What I never understood about that is why, because there seemed to be like this like pride around having Huskies, and we were real like, and by we I'm just generalizing the adults in the house were real like, I don't it wasn't like bragging that you had them, but it was like, we have these dogs and they're these beautiful dogs, and talking about them to other people, but then nobody knew that the way that the dogs were living.
Right.
And I always it was such a dichotomy to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like how can you do that? but I wasn't in a position to, I got there because I didn't have anywhere to go. And I didn't have to pay any money to be there. My payment was to take care of you guys when I was there. They wanted me to cook, but I I didn't know how. What I remember is whatever he cooked for you guys is what you guys had, what everybody in the house had, and then your female caregiver would come home with like Hardee's and go eat in their bedroom.
So, and what was the treatment that you saw that me and my sister got?
And I'm sure that there was more. I don't remember a ton. What I remember is I remember like you getting your hair done and getting smacked with brushes. I remember you being called little sluts. I don't remember why. I don't remember like what precipitated that, like the being mad. I don't know what happened. But being told that you were little sluts a lot, and saying things like you're going to wind up pregnant, just forecasting your future, like you were just doomed. And you weren't naughty, you weren't doing bad stuff that I knew, like where you were like, I mean, you're 9 or 10 maybe. Mm-hmm. It was just verbally abusive, but it was just demeaning to you, specifically to the girls. But I also feel like your biological brother didn't fare well either with verbal abuse. This is an awful thing for me to say. But I felt like you guys were a check. When you have foster children, you get a check for them.
Yeah, I had no idea.
And so that would be motivation to have many foster children.
You would get all that money, and the house was in the condition that it was in.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember when the community came together and they took my mom to court and they said, you got to do something about the house because, this is a historical neighborhood. And I think that she even got like help from the
They did something. They fixed it up a little bit, like the outside.
Yep.
I don't know about the inside.
No. Well, they ended up putting like tile down on the floor, and Mom mixed up the wrong cement, and we had to go outside and get all the cement off the back of the tiles. So she didn't hire people. She made basically the light-skinned kids do it.
Somebody redid the porch. That got because that was a death trap.
Yeah, we were outside painting. It was like, what is going on here? Let me ask you this. How many different women do you think were coming in and out of our home and engaging in the sexual activity while we were around?
Several. There were 5. I'm going to call them boys because they never were men. 5 boys that lived there. I was sadly with one of them. And then there were 4 others, and they rotated girls quite a bit. But I don't know how many of them were. There wasn't enough room to be there, and there wasn't anywhere to go. And so they had several girls, but they would go to their houses, I think, primarily. Like,
no, I remember I used to bring them into Mom's room.
Gross. I mean, there were a couple that, like, they would bring their, like, regular, like, the people who thought they were the girlfriends, they would come there. But there was, however many on the sides all over. And that's just, I'm sure there was just a bunch of STIs flowing freely through that joint. Like, gross. I know there were, because I know who had them and who kept spreading them. I mean, just really awful things happen there that you guys should never have seen.
Right.
and never been exposed to and never been left alone with.
Mm-hmm. I remember the music being so loud while we had to sleep at night, and the caregivers didn't care.
No. And this was the male caregiver was not there at this time when I was there.
Yeah.
Because we were engaged to somebody in prison then.
Like our older sister. I remember when you said you were leaving. Do you remember how hard we cried?
No, but it would have been really hard, and like I told you, that's probably why I stayed as long as I did. Was because of just how responsible I felt. I mean, I loved you guys. I came to see you after a couple times, but it was so hard to walk back in there, and I knew what was. I mean, I knew, but there was nothing I could do. I was still a kid, and there was nobody that was going to change anybody's minds on that. And like I told you, if I would have spoken up, I was more afraid that I would be called, like a racist bitch. Like it wouldn't have been. It would have been turned against me. Like, I'm not looking out for you guys. I'm just talking shit about, and I'm ungrateful, and I'm, because they let me stay there, whatever the case may be. So I knew the way it was going to go if I ever said anything. And at that time, I didn't know that the other things were happening to you. And so I also was hopeful that at least one of those people was looking out for you.
Do you remember any reports of CPS or social services coming?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I don't either. I don't.
But if I would have been, hopeful that they did, but I never witnessed it.
Yeah,
did they come?
They would come to our school to check up on us. They never came to our home.
Really? That's even more bizarre. Why wouldn't they come to the house?
They probably. You actually give a really good perspective that I never thought about was like how, well, for one, you knew these people weren't the safest people to be around. You know what I'm saying? It's not like those boys were known to be gentle.
I wasn't scared anybody's gonna do anything to me. What I was scared about is if I said something would happen to you. Just check in those kinds of ways, but it was almost too hard to be any closer than that. And it was such a short amount of time that I was there, but you guys were always kind of on my heart, to get people to acknowledge their part in your story when it's not good. Is probably very difficult. And I admire what you're doing, because I think you guys need to know, and you deserve the truth, and you deserve to be able to ask the questions about why would you do me like that? How could you leave babies? How could you leave a 2-year-old? How could you, how could you? Because we don't understand it. We have our own kids now, and you just could never. And so how is it possible that somebody could do those things or allow those things? So nothing got any better after your male caregiver moved back in.
Came back, and he removed everybody that was not, like, he made it back a home. Like, he made everyone leave. But that never stopped the female caregiver from verbally abusing us or making sure that we always felt less than, or stopping perpetrators from coming in. Perpetrators were still coming in our home.